The first official record of anything unusual in Greystone dates to March 2nd, 1923, a Friday. The police logbook from the nearby Brampton station lists a brief report at 8:17 p.m. Received call from Father Edwin Mallory, reports missing families. 7 homes. Requests urgent visit. What the report didn't mention was the sound. Several residents described it differently. To one, it was like a storm with no clouds. To another, a deep humming, like a train engine buried underground. But by the time Constable Isaac Penley arrived at Greystone Village, just 32 minutes after the call, there was no sound at all. Only silence. And 7 homes, completely abandoned. No parents. No children. Greystone was the kind of place no one visited, unless they had a reason. A farming village barely marked on any maps, tucked against the edge of Blackheath Forest. The land was mostly owned by the Ashbridge Trust, a religious welfare organization. After the war, they had converted a large manor on the hill into an orphanage for children whose parents had either died in combat or couldn't afford to keep them. Greystone House, they called it. The children called it the High House. Father Edwin Mallory was the man in charge. A former army chaplain, clean-shaven, severe eyes. Rumors swirled around him in nearby towns about punishments, locked doors, and prayers that went on for hours, but none of it was ever proven. The church supported him. So did the trust. Until that Friday, in March, when Penley reached Greystone's narrow main road, he was met by Father Mallory himself. The priest looked pale. His coat was soaked from rain. His hand shook slightly. "They're gone," Mallory said without greeting. "All of them. Every one of them." "Who?" asked Penley. "The parents. The families. I tried knocking. I looked in the windows. It's not just a matter of absence. Something's wrong." Penley was skeptical. Bad weather and village superstition weren't new, but procedure was procedure. He followed Mallory through the village's eastern cluster, past stone cottages and dry wells. He called out, knocked doors. He even tried opening one, the Carsons' home. It was unlocked. Inside, the fire had gone out, but the embers were warm. A loaf of bread sat unsliced on the table. A kettle whistled faintly on the stove. Upstairs, empty beds, one still unmade. Not a single adult or child in the house. At 9:03 p.m., Penley radioed Brampton Station to request assistance. He used the phrase mass disappearance, but his superior, Sergeant Dole, thought it premature. By midnight, 11 houses were found abandoned. The next morning, with no official orders but growing concern, Sergeant Dole arrived in Greystone with 2 additional constables. They conducted a full canvass. Nothing stolen, no signs of struggle. In some homes, personal belongings had been left behind, as if the occupants had stepped out for a moment. In others, it appeared people had left mid-meal. By the end of the day, a total of 24 adults and 36 children from 14 separate families were listed as missing, and not a single witness had seen anyone leave. Among the many peculiarities was this: Greystone House, the orphanage, remained fully occupied. All 28 orphans, ranging in age from 5 to 15, were accounted for. So were the 3 staff members who lived on site. None of them reported hearing or seeing anything unusual during the night. "We prayed until late," said one of the older boys, 15-year-old Gregory Hatch. "Like we always do." Father Mallory said it would be a long one. Constable Penley noted that Gregory seemed unusually calm, even when others were visibly shaken. He also noted that Greystone House had locked its doors before dusk, something Mallory claimed was standard procedure. When asked why the staff hadn't checked the village during the night, Mallory simply said, "We've learned not to wander." After dark, a full investigation was ordered within 3 days. The local press, careful not to sensationalize, referred to it as the Greystone quieting. National papers ignored it altogether, but then, just 10 days later, on March 12th, every single orphan vanished from Greystone House. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry, beds made, kitchen untouched. Only the staff remained: father, Mallory, and 2 women, one of whom claimed to have seen a bright shape in the hallway during the night. Her name was Margaret Ellis, a kitchen worker in her late 30s. She had worked at the orphanage for 4 years. They weren't taken, she told Penley the next morning. They followed it. Every one of them. When asked to clarify what she meant by it, she said, "I don't know what it was. It wasn't a man. It wasn't an animal. It was light, but not like fire or a lantern. It moved like it was floating, and the children followed it." By then, the case was already beyond local jurisdiction. The Home Office assigned a special investigator, Ms. Althea Hargrove, an intelligence officer recently returned from assignments in Europe. She had a reputation for discretion and resolve. She arrived on March 14, 1923. Her first action, seal off Greystone. No one in or out without written authorization. Her second, interrogate father, Mallory. Hargrove's notes from her first interview with Mallory remain partially redacted in the surviving case file, but several statements are visible. "I never harmed them. I tried to protect them. They were chosen. It wasn't punishment. It was ascension. You don't understand what this place is built on. The parents broke the rules. The children were taken. Mallory was not arrested. There was no evidence tying him to the disappearances, but his statements alarmed Hargrove enough to order a full forensic sweep of Greystone House. That night, while the officers slept, Mallory slit his own throat in the chapel using a piece of broken stained glass. He left behind a journal. Inside that journal were 7 pages of strange markings, what appeared to be symbols or diagrams that no one at the time could decipher. He also wrote one final entry. It was dated the night of the second disappearance. "They've come again, but not like before. They called the children by name, each one of them. I told them not to answer. I told them the world would not forgive them if they stepped through. But they don't care about forgiveness anymore. They just want to go home." The case was closed later that year. Official cause of disappearance, unknown. No bodies were ever found. No footprints leaving Greystone. No suspects. No leads. But that wasn't the end. In 1971, almost 50 years, Latura construction crew digging a waterline near the old Greystone Chapel uncovered something buried 6 feet beneath the earth. A small, rusted box. Inside were 17 hand-drawn portraits of children. Every face had the eyes scratched out, and on the back of each drawing, a name and a date. Every date matched the night of March 12, 1923, March 15, 1923, the morning after Father Mallory's suicide. The interior of Greystone House smelled of rotting wood, old paper, and paraffin. The storm from the night before had knocked loose one of the attic windows. Rain had soaked half a hallway and a full bedroom. But what troubled Althea Hargrove most was the silence. The place felt like it had been empty for decades, not days. She stood in the dormitory, inspecting 28 neatly made beds. Each had a footlocker. Each footlocker held the same items: 2 spare uniforms, a Bible, and a single wooden rosary. The personal belongings of the children, notes, drawings, toys were missing. "I've been through them twice," said Constable Penley, who stood in the doorway watching her. "Either someone cleared them out after they vanished, or they took everything with them." "Children don't pack in silence," Althea muttered. She opened another locker. Inside was something different, tucked beneath the Biblia notebook. The cover was scorched and water-damaged, but the spine was intact. The name on the inside flap, Gregory Hatch. Gregory Hatch, the 15-year-old boy who had seemed so calm after the first disappearances. His body had never been found. His file said he was a war orphan, born in 1908, admitted in 1916 after both parents were declared unfit and committed to a county asylum. Althea flagged the file for later. She took the notebook and returned to the chapel. where Mallory's body had already been removed. A small stain still darkened the stone floor where he'd collapsed. Blood had pooled beneath the altar. She sat alone in the rear pew and opened Gregory's notebook. Most of the pages were blank. The first third of the book was filled with mostly strange angular shapes drawn over and over. Some pages had 2 or 3 versions of the same symbol layered on top of each other. A few sketches appeared to be diagrams of rooms. One resembled the interior of the chapel, but with an added detail. Beneath the altar, there was a square marked trap. Althea closed the book and stood up. She walked slowly toward the altar and knelt. There was a trap door, just as Gregory had drawn it. It creaked when opened. Beneath it, a narrow wooden staircase descending into earth. No one at Greystone had ever mentioned a basement. Mallory's files made no reference to one. Althea retrieved her lantern, holstered her revolver, and descended. The basement was smaller than she expected. Damp air, stone walls, rough dirt floor, and in the center, a circular carving about 5 feet wide. More of the same symbols from the journal, burned into the floor with precision. The marks had been retraced many times, some fresher than others. What caught her attention, however, was the smell. Not rot, not mold. Something sharper. Burned wax. She scanned the perimeter and found candle stubs at least. 20 melted down into small pools. This wasn't just a hidden room. It was used recently. March 16, 1923, Althea sent a direct wire to the Home Office, requesting full access to Father Mallory's archived correspondence with the Ashbridge Trust. She also ordered a full dig of the chapel's foundation, beginning with the circle in the basement. No results yet. That afternoon, she finally began reading through Mallory's personal journal in full. Unlike Gregory's, his was filled edge to edge. The early entries were mundane. Reports of admissions, complaints about food rations, requests for staff funding. But then, midway through the journal, the tone shifted. The forest sings at night now. The children don't hear it, but I do. They wait in the soil. The villagers used to know, but they forgot. The war made them forget. But memory is not safety. I've begun the naming again. I told myself I never would. But they asked. They always ask eventually. And what can I say? We are bound. Althea flagged every entry that included the words naming, ascension, or the rule. There were 47 such entries that night. She walked to the edge of Blackheath Forest, alone. Locals in Brampton had warned her that the Greystone children never played near the trees. They'd say things like, "The forest doesn't want you after dusk," or if you hear a second set of footsteps, don't around. Althea had seen enough war to ignore superstition, but as she stood at the tree line, she noticed something that made her skin crawl. Hanging from the lower branches were dozens of small wooden carvings, little effigies in the shape of humans, no more than 6 inches tall. All of them had been nailed into the trees. Most were old, some were new, a few still had fresh strings attached, as if they'd recently been bound. One had a name carved into the chest, Gregory. She took the figure and brought it back to her quarters at the inn, placed it on the desk, began taking notes. That's when she noticed the smell again, wax, and underneath the figure, something was carved into the desk she hadn't seen before. Not etched by her, not recent. Someone had done it long ago and covered it with varnish. The words were barely visible now, but they were there. We were told not to name them. We did, and they answered. March 17, 1923. The dig beneath the chapel uncovered bones. Tiny ones. 27 skulls. Most of them juvenile. They were not buried in any formal way. The bodies had been laid in a shallow pit, side by side, and covered with a tarp made of stitched linen. The linen bore the emblem of the Ashbridge Trust. Each skull had markings on the frontal bone symbols carved, not by trauma, but etched deliberately with a blade. After death, Penley vomited. One of the younger constables fainted. Althea stood still for several minutes, then calmly ordered the entire area sealed. They photographed everything, took measurements, bagged samples. She counted the again, 20-7, not 28. One child was missing, Gregory Hatch. Althea requested the church's full record of orphan admissions over the past 15 years. The Ashbridge Trust replied, a week later, with a single page. It listed 28 names, but Gregory's wasn't on it. He'd never been registered. He was never officially part of Greystone House. March 18, 1923. Rain again. Low visibility. Mud thick across Greystone's only road. Althea Hargrove sat inside the former schoolhouse, now converted into a temporary field office. Laid out before her were the church's official orphanage admissions from 1908 to 1923. 28 names, dates of admission, medical notes, parish approvals. Each entry had a corresponding file, except one. Gregory Hatch, no birth certificate, no guardianship papers, no record of transfer from any other institution. Yet his name was included on a list submitted to the Ashbridge Trust in 1916, when she asked the trust to confirm who submitted the list. Their reply was unsettling. The record was compiled and signed by Father Edwin Mallory. It was not reviewed by the trust board before submission. So Althea did what any proper investigator would do. She traced the paper trail back. If Gregory wasn't listed in the church's records, perhaps he was listed somewhere else. That afternoon, she wired the Brampton County Hospital and Asylum, requesting patient records for two individuals committed in 1916, Howard and Ruth Hatch, Gregory's supposed parents. The reply arrived 3 hours later. Howard and Ruth Hatch were admitted in June 1913. Ruth died in 1915. Howard committed suicide in 1916. No surviving next of kin. Althea stared at the words for a long time. If the Hatches had no children, then who was Gregory? March 19, 1923, a letter arrived at the inn, unsigned, unmarked. No return address. Inside was a single line of handwriting in pencil. You're looking in the wrong place. Ask what was under Greystone before the house. The ink was smudged, as if written in haste. Althea took it straight to Penley. I want the property records, she told him. Everything before the war. I want deeds, leases, survey maps, anything that shows what this land was before the Ashbridge Trust got hold of it. Penley, too. His credit didn't question her. He left immediately. The records he retrieved came from the county archives, many of them handwritten and barely legible. But by late evening, a pattern began to emerge. Greystone House, formerly the orphanage, had not always been a manor. Before it was seized in 1917 under the Reclamation Act, it had been a private estate built in the late 1700s by a man named Rev. Silas Northwood. Northwood was a theologian and occult historian who had once published a banned tract titled The Echo of Eden, Names That Were Not Ours to Speak. The tract had been condemned by the Church of England in 1802 and removed from circulation. Rumors at the time suggested that Northwood had practiced ritual experiments involving children, not physically harming them, but teaching them strange chants and rituals in the forests surrounding Greystone. He was arrested in 1811 for religious corruption and blasphemy, and died in prison 2 years later. The estate sat abandoned for nearly a century, till the Ashbridge Trust acquired it. No records indicated the trust had knowledge of the sites. Former use. Althea was no longer sure they were telling the truth. March 20, 1923. They found a hidden crawlspace beneath the foundation of the dormitory wing, buried beneath floorboards. The entrance was no more than 3 feet wide. At the far end of the space, there was a box. Inside it, a set of stone tablets, no bigger than slates used in schoolrooms. Each tablet contained inscriptions, names. They weren't English, nor Latin, but each was paired with an English equivalent. Carved below it, names like Thally, Simon, Ulra, Beatrice, Annette, Gregory. The names weren't listed alphabetically or in order of age, but the last three entries had something in common there, corresponding English. Names were all orphans who had vanished, and there was no Gregory Hatch listed among them. Instead, at the bottom of the final slate was a single symbol, not a name, just a circle with 3 lines cutting through it. Althea compared it to Gregory's notebook. He had drawn the same symbol repeatedly on the back page 27 times, a grid of them, with one left empty in the middle. That night Penley came to our quarters, visibly shaken. "We went back to the forest," he said, removing his hat. "To those wooden dolls. There's something new." Althea followed him under lamplight. Sure enough, a new carving had been nailed to the tree. It hadn't been there before, its strings still clean, the wood fresh. The name carved across the chest. Althea. They tore it down immediately and brought it back with them. But that night, Althea couldn't sleep. March 21st, 1923, Althea compiled a new timeline. Everything pointed to 3 recurring ideas. The rule, an ancient restriction against naming. Gregory Hatch, a child who existed in function but not in record. The circle, both the physical symbol in the chapel and a metaphor repeated in both Gregory's and Mallory's writings. She reread Mallory's final journal entries. One line stuck with her. Gregory didn't follow the others, he led them. Althea began reviewing witness interviews against specially Margaret Ellis, the kitchen worker who claimed to see the light in the hallway. One detail she hadn't flagged before surfaced. Gregory stood by the chapel door. He didn't speak, but the others followed him. Why would a child lead 27 others out of an orphanage in the middle of the night? Why would a priest, a man of structure and command, allow it? And more importantly, what if Gregory Hatch wasn't a child at all? March 22nd, 1923, for 3 nights. Althea Hargrove had heard the same sound echo through her room at precisely 3:14 a.m. A faint knock, not on the door, on the window pane. The first time, she dismissed it as wind. The second, she checked the latch still locked from the inside. But on the third night, she walked to the glass in the dark and saw it, a child's handprint, pressed into the condensation on the outside. Small, deliberate, 5 fingers, no footprints beneath it in the mud. The next morning, Althea returned to the chapel basement and ordered the circular engraving to be excavated fully. 2 workers used chisels and brushes to clear away packed soil and candle wax. Beneath the top layer was something unexpected. Iron pins, embedded around the circle's edge, forming a pattern of 13 points. "They were hammered in from above," said one of the men. "Deliberate. Look how evenly spaced they are." One of the pins had been removed recently. The soil around it was looser. In its place was a fresh mark scratched into the stone, a shape, the same symbol from Gregory's notebook. A circle intersected by 3 straight lines. Althea stepped back, careful not to cross the edge. She remembered Mallory's journal again as line. "The circle is not a barrier, it's a door." She suddenly wondered if they had already opened it. March 23rd, 1923, Penley returned from the Brampton archives with new documents, land blueprints dated 1894. One caught Althea's attention. An architectural plan labeled Northwood Memorial Rotunda. The rotunda had been built beneath the original chapel, commissioned by Silas Northwood's final living heir. It had been described in old documents as a place of names. That phrase again, names, according to church records. The rotunda was sealed in 1902 after a fire, but the blueprint clearly showed that it lay directly beneath the current chapel beneath. Even the circle. There was a second door. They just hadn't found it yet. That night, Althea stood again in the chapel basement, with lantern in hand. The light caught something in the wall she hadn't noticed before, small indentations, forming a faint rectangle, a seam. She pressed gently on the edges. Nothing moved. Then she remembered. Gregory had drawn a diagram in his notebook of the chapel basement. In the margin, he'd written a single word, "Speak." Althea hesitated. Then, cautiously, she said aloud, "Annette." It was the word carved into the stone slate next to Gregory's English name. For a few seconds nothing. Then, the stone wall trembled. A small click echoed from within, and the hidden door in the foundation swung open, revealing a descending staircase, steep, uneven, and far older than the chapel above it. Penley, standing beside her, muttered under his breath, "God help us." They descended in silence. The air was cold, still no spider webs, no scent of rot, just dry stone and faint echoes at the bottom. They reached a circular chamber no more than 20 feet wide. On each wall was a niche containing a stone tablet, similar to those found earlier. But here, the inscriptions were deeper, older, as though carved by hands that remembered the shape too well. Althea moved her lantern along the walls. Her eyes froze on the far tablet. One symbol, that same intersecting circle, only this time, beneath it, written in faded charcoal, was a line in English. "He who has no name shall lead those who gave theirs." Althea felt her mouth go dry. Penley leaned over her shoulder. "Does this mean the children were given names from these stones?" he asked. Althea answered softly, "Or they were made to give up their own, and take the ones written here." She opened her notebook and began listing every symbol she could identify. A total of 13 tablets were in the chamber, each with a symbol, all but one with an English name below. Only the intersecting circle remained without translation. They sealed the stairwell and posted a constable at the chapel until further notice. That evening, Althea requested official permission from the Home Office to transport the tablets to London. It was denied. Instead, she was told to wrap up the investigation. The Ashbridge Trust had applied political pressure. The village was to be vacated and sold. The trust would be liquidating Greystone's remaining assets. She had 5 days, but Althea wasn't finished. March 24th, 1923. The tablet with the intersecting circle had been stolen. The constable guarding the chapel claimed he heard nothing. Number 1 had entered, but the secret stairwell door was found ajar. Footprints in the basement where small child-sized hand led back up the stairs before disappearing near the main altar. They followed the trail to the forest, stopped abruptly after 15 meters. Althea felt it immediately, a shift in air pressure, like standing in a room just after a bell had rung. It wasn't sound. It was something underneath sound. She turned to Penley. "Whatever this is, it's not over." He nodded grimly. "And Gregory?" Althea stared back toward the chapel. "He's not missing. He's waiting." March 25th, 1923. The sun hadn't risen yet when the call came in. A shepherd from the outskirts of Brampton reported seeing children standing silently in the fog just beyond the tree line near Greystone. "They weren't playing," he told Penley. "They were just watching." I called out. No response. When I got closer, they were gone. Penley relayed the report to Althea. She was already awake, studying a page from Mallory's journal again, one she'd previously overlooked. "They only follow those who give up what they were. A name surrendered is a chain broken, but once it's broken, you cannot go back. Only forward, only deeper." This concept named surrender was beginning to take shape. The tablets beneath the chapel weren't just symbols. They were tokens of exchange, and the orphanage, beneath its religious cover, had functioned for years as a site of ritualized erasure. The children hadn't simply disappeared. They had given something up, and in return, they'd become something else. Althea spent the morning in the old office, attached to Greystone House. There, buried beneath years of paperwork and faded newsletters, she found what she'd been hoping for, a leather-bound roster dated 1921, handwritten by Mallory, titled Orphans, assigned and unassigned. Every child's name was paired with a second, often a symbol, or in some cases, a translated version of it. Simon Carter, Thalabetrus, Moore, Alra Halsey, Wren, Noket, and finally, blank space, Anathos. Only entry without a given name was Gregory's. Instead, he was paired only with the symbol, the intersecting circle. Penley, standing behind her, asked the obvious question: if he didn't give up his name, why was he part of all this? Althea closed the book slowly. He wasn't part of it, she said. He was the one it was built around. That afternoon, an unexpected knock at the door. A boy, 12, maybe 13, pale, wet shoes, torn collar. He introduced himself quietly. I used to live here. My parents were caretakers. We left when I was 5. Althea let him in, offered him tea, listened. Daniel wasn't on any of the orphanage rosters. My father used to fix the bells. The big one in the chapel. Said it only rang when Mallory wanted the children to pray. But sometimes, it rang at night, and they all stood up. Every one of them, like they were waiting for something. He fidgeted, then added, I saw Gregory, once he was in the forest, standing behind a tree, just watching me. He never blinked. When was this? Althea asked. Daniel looked up. Last week. Penley froze. That's impossible, he said. But Althea was already writing. Let him speak. Daniel hesitated, then added something more. He didn't look older. Not at all. Just like I remembered. March 26, 1923, the intersecting circle appeared again, this time painted on the chapel's front door in ash or soot. No footprints, no brush, just the symbol, nearly 4 feet wide, centered perfectly. Althea had it photographed, then washed off before anyone from the trust could arrive. But it was clear now. Gregory was active, and he was trying to show her something. That evening, she met again with Margaret Ellis, the last surviving staff member who had worked during the disappearances. Althea pressed her for details on Gregory's behavior in the final days. Margaret broke down, then spoke. Father Mallory didn't assign Gregory a name. He couldn't. Gregory already had one. Not English, not Latin. He said Gregory wasn't sent here for salvation. He was sent to prepare the rest. Prepare them for what? Althea asked. Margaret's voice was barely audible. To make sure they crossed willingly. Althea returned to her room late. The doll carved with her name taken from the forest had been left standing upright on her desk. She had locked the room before leaving. No signs of forced entry. This time, something new had been etched into the wood beneath her name. 1. Left to name. She reviewed every document again. 20-7 orphans had vanished. Gregory was the 28th, but not part of the count, which meant 1 child remained. Someone unaccounted for. Someone who hadn't taken a new name. She looked at the roster again, and saw it. A scribbled out line at the very bottom. Jonah Elridge. No symbol. He wasn't on the tablets. Not in Mallory's journal. But he had been admitted, and he'd never been reported missing. March 27, 1923. It was just past 6 a.m. when Althea stood beneath the broken bell tower, staring up at the rusted iron frame. Penley climbed beside her, holding a lantern, the light trembling in his hand. You think Jonah Elridge is still alive? He asked. I think, Althea replied, that Jonah never left. The name had been intentionally scratched off the Greystone roster, but in the admissions ledger at Brampton Council Hall, his name remained Jonah Elridge, age 11, admitted to Greystone Orphanage on April 3, 1921. Status: deferred. No other child had that status. They were either assigned or departed. Jonah had been held back from something. From what? She wasn't sure. Althea searched every file and discovered a single mention in a letter. Addressed to Father Mallory. Elridge does not respond to the circle. No reaction to the chapel symbols. Refuses to participate in renaming rituals. Keep him separated. The rest must proceed. GDM Jeffrey Daniel Mallory. Even in private correspondence. He signed his full name and title. They checked. The chapel's undercroft again that afternoon. Penley noticed it first a second chamber, hidden behind a false wall just past the altar stairs. The wall, when pressed, gave way with a heavy crack. The space inside was narrow, and the air stank of dust, damp, and old paper. Inside, they found a cot, a child's cot, small, rusted frame, still holding a thin woolen blanket. On the wall above, it were scratched names over and over, in different handwritings. Each name led to another, and another, crossed out, rewritten, reversed. All, except one. Jonah, UNCROSSED, unchanged, repeated dozens of times in the same handwriting. Althea stood in that room for nearly an hour. She said nothing. She was remembering something Daniel had told her earlier that week. The chapel bell rang even when the wind didn't blow. It always meant someone was about to forget who they were. But what if one of them never did? What if Jonah resisted the forgetting? That night, Althea couldn't sleep. She kept going over Mallory's journal, again and again. One entry stood out now, one she had ignored before. One who resists becomes the hinge. The lock remains, the gate unfinished. The others must wait, cycling until the final refusal is corrected. Gate, lock, hinge. It wasn't metaphor, it was mechanism. March 28, 1923. The children had not left Greystone. They had not died. They had not been taken. They were stuck, as if trapped between names, between selves. Because one child, Jonah, had refused to be rewritten. Later that evening, Penley found her again. His hands were shaking. He'd received a telegram from a nurse stationed near the coast, in a closed institution for troubled children. An old patient had suddenly begun screaming names in the middle of the night, names no one recognized. With no known relatives, the boy's name, Jonah Elridge. Althea traveled by train the next morning. The facility was cold, dimly lit. Jonah was now 13. He sat in the corner of his cell-like room, facing the wall, tracing circles in the stone with his fingernail. She approached him cautiously. Jonah. He didn't move, but then he whispered something. She leaned in closer. He repeated, "I kept my name. I held the door. He's still waiting." Althea froze. "Who's waiting?" Jonah turned his head. "Gregory." Then his voice dropped an octave. "He wants me to say it, the circle word, but I won't. If I say it, he finishes. He finishes all of us." That night, after returning to Greystone, Althea had a nightmare. She saw the 27 children standing in the forest, barefoot, drenched, their eyes hollow. Gregory stood behind them, not aged, not dead, just waiting, and then he spoke, in a voice that wasn't human. "You brought her here. Now say the name." Althea awoke, gasping for breath. The doll with her name carved into it was now facing the window, its wooden face smeared with ashdot, and beneath it, a piece of torn parchment. On it, "If he says the name, you lose yours next." March 30th, 1923. It was Althea's last visit to Jonah. She had come without Penley. Jonah sat upright this time, silent, watching her. "You remember me?" she asked. He didn't nod. He didn't blink. Then finally, "You found the doll, didn't you?" Althea didn't answer. She didn't need to. Jonah continued. "It's how he keeps track. Not of the ones he took, but the ones who spoke." She placed a small mirror down on the floor between them. "Jonah, in the chapel, what happened during the naming ritual?" Jonah clenched his jaw. "You're asking the wrong question. It's not about what happened. It's about what they said." Althea waited. There was a word. You say it once, and the symbol gets inside your name. You say it twice, and the circle marks you. 3 times. He paused, then whispered, "And you forget who said it first." Althea had reviewed all Mallory's records. None of them included that word, but all of them mentioned reinforcement sessions. For children who resisted, she asked Jonah what they looked like. His voice dropped. They made us kneel in a circle, one child in the center, the others around, whispering the same word, over and over, until it took. Althea's skin turned cold. Took what? Jonah stared at her. The part of you that remembered your real name. In Greystone's basement, Penley had made a discovery while she was away. A compartment Apple's icon wall. Inside was a wooden box, sealed with 7 nails. He opened it against better judgment. Inside were 7 carved tongues, wooden, each labeled with a child's name. 6 were cracked, 1 still whole. Jonah, that night. Althea heard movement in the hallway outside her quarters. She opened the door to find all 27 dolls laid out across the floor, each one facing the chapel. One of them had its mouth split open, and on the wall, someone had written, "Say it, and see them again." March 31st, 1923, the storm rolled in heavy that evening. Wind lashed against the chapel windows. Althea stood at the altar, looking at the broken bell. Behind her, she heard a soft creak the back door. Penley entered slowly, pale. "I checked the chapel ledger again," he said. "You were right. There were only 26 children listed after the last ceremony." Althea turned to him. "Jonah was the 27th. Penley nodded. "And Gregory?" Penley unfolded a small paper he had found nailed behind the altar. It wasn't Mallory's handwriting. It was a child's. Just one word written over and over, EYA. Althea felt her chest tighten. She said it once aloud. Testing it. Nothing. She said it again. Wind howled through the chapel. Then she whispered it a third time. EYA. The candles went out. The dolls turned in unison. The bell rang on its own. A child's voice echoed from the chapel pews. "You remembered it." Althea turned. A boy was standing near the pulpit, soaked to the bone, barefoot, eyes completely black. She stepped back. "Gregory," he smiled. "You said it, so now I say yours." She reached for the door, but it was sealed then. From somewhere inside her head, Althea read him, "Is no longer your name. Would you like a new one?" March 31st, 1923. Nightfall. The chapel was sealed. Althea could feel the air shift. Not just around her, but inside her. Her thoughts slowed. Her limbs, heavy. The boy with black eyes. Gregory tilted his head. "You," said the word. "You opened the circle." Althea tried to move toward the altar, but her feet wouldn't lift. "You want their names back?" Gregory whispered. "You want your own?" Suddenly, a crack of thunder. The door burst open. Penley had forced it from the outside with a crowbar, panting. Soaked with rain, he grabbed her by the arm and pulled her out into the courtyard. Behind them, the bell tolled once more. They didn't look back. April 1st, 1923, the next morning, Jonah was gone from the infirmary. His bed undisturbed. The doll missing from her satchel. Althea said nothing. Penley said nothing, but both knew what it meant. Someone had called his name 3 times. Later that day, Penley discovered something far worse. In a file box labeled transferred, he found 26 envelopes, each with a photograph, each with a fabricated adoption certificate. But none of the children ever left Greystone. The adoption agents never existed, and the same signature appeared on every form. G. Mallory, on behalf of the circle. Althea turned to Penley. There were never any transfers, just vanishings. The rituals weren't symbolic. They were real transactions. Penley stared at her. "With who?" She shook her head. "I don't know." But the children were currency, and names were the price. That night, they tested something. Penley wrote Althea's full name on a mirror in the basement. She stood before it and repeated her name 3 times, then the word, "Ia." Nothing happened. Then Penley whispered her name. Althea read 3 times. She fell to her knees, gasping. Something took it. I could feel it trying to rewrite me. Althea insisted. They returned to the chapel one last time, to destroy what was left inside. They found the dolls arranged in a new pattern, not in a circle, but in rows. Classroom rows. At the front sat Jonah's doll, mouth stitched shut. Behind it, 26 others, all facing the altar, and on the blackboard above them, they remember better without names. In the vestry, Penley lit the oil. Althea hesitated. There's one thing left, she said, and returned to the crypt beneath the chapel. There, embedded in the far wall, she found it, a mirror covered in soot and nail scratches at the top, carved. Initials G.M. Mallory had sealed it. She scraped the soot free and looked into it. What she saw wasn't herself. It was every child, blank-faced, mouth open, waiting. Then, something began whispering behind her. Not one voice, dozens, repeating the word Aya, Iya, Iya. She slammed the mirror down. It cracked, but did not shatter. Penley dragged her out. They burned everything, the dolls, the pews, the altar, but not the mirror. That remained untouched, unburned. The bell tower collapsed just after midnight, and with it, the last child's name was lost. April 3rd, 1923. Early morning, the chapel smoldered for hours. By dawn, it was a blackened ruin, charred stone, fractured timbers, and ash where the altar once stood. Penley and Althea returned with tools and gloves. They dug through the debris, searching for anything left behind. Within the ruined foundation, they found a trapdoor. It had been hidden beneath the choir pews, reinforced with iron, burnt, but intact. Penley looked at Althea. You ready? She nodded. They pried it open. A cold rush of air spilled out. Beneath was a stone staircase, descending into complete blackness. The chapel's sublevel, unknown time with lit. They descended. The walls were narrow, damp. On each side, there were alcoves, some with tiny beds, some with drawings carved into the stone, strange sigils, inverted letters, childlike stick figures, missing mouths. Althea whispered, these weren't cells. They were ... classrooms. In one of the alcoves, they found Gregory's coat, folded and placed neatly beside a rusted chair. On the seat sat a tin can with dozens of matchsticks each, one painted black at the tip. Althea counted them. 27. Further down, the air grew thick, and then they heard it, a scraping sound, rhythmic and slow. Not behind them. Not ahead. Below. Penley single quotes, his grip tightened on his lantern. Something's still down here. They reached a final landing, where a large wooden door stood sealed, with iron bolts and rope. Symbols were carved into its frame, blood-colored, still wet to the touch. At eye level, a message was burned into the wood. Do not rename the forgotten. Penley turned to Althea. What if we don't go in? Althea didn't answer. She removed the rope and pulled the door open. Inside was a wide stone chamber, filled with rows of shelves. Each held dozens of glass jars, every one containing a folded scrap of paper. No labels, no dates. She opened one and read the first note. It said simply, Cora, age 7, removed. She opened another, Thomas, age 6, accepted. And another, Jonah, age 8, delivered. Suddenly, all the lanterns flickered, the temperature dropped, and then from behind the shelves came footsteps, but not heavy, soft, barefoot, multiple. Penley turned. Who's there? The footsteps stopped. Then out from the shadows stepped a child, a girl, maybe 8, with stitched lips and eyes that reflected no light. She extended a hand. In her palm was a jar. Inside a paper. Althea read 'em. Pending. Penley grabbed Althea's arm and backed away. More children emerged. 1, then 5, then dozens, silent, staring. Althea whispered, they're the renamed, the ones erased. They didn't speak, but somehow they heard them. One thought, repeated like a heartbeat in both their heads. You said our names. You opened the mirror. Penley dropped the lantern. The flames didn't catch. Nothing burned. They fled the sublevel, resealed the trapdoor, and buried it under layers of broken stone and charred pews. That night, Althea left a final note in the infirmary journal. We cannot give their names back, but we can keep them from taking more. She and Penley left Greystone before dawn. Neither looked back. But 2 days later, in a letter addressed to Dr. Harold Silby, head of the Orphanage Council, Penley wrote one sentence that was later censored from the report. The orphanage was not abandoned by the children, was fed by them. April 5, 1923. London. Althea and Penley had returned to the city in silence. No reports filed, no police alerts, just a closed case and a destroyed building and orphanage that never wanted to be remembered. Althea had nightmares every night since they left. She saw Cora, Jonah, Thomas the renamed, all staring, all waiting, and always, in her dream, the same jar. Her name, Althea read him. Pending. April 9th, the letter. Penley received a letter. No return address, just a wax seal, the Greystone crest. Inside was a single photograph, old and faded. A group of orphans, 27 up in front of the Greystone chapel. At the center stood Sister Lillian, hands on the shoulders of a small boy. Penley turned the photo over. Written on the back, he was the first to be erased, so the others could remain. You saved no one. Penley went straight to the public registry. The next morning he looked up the original enrollment records for Greystone Orphanage. Something was off. There were no records for 27 children, just one. Only Gregory Shale was ever officially documented as a ward of Greystone. No mention of Cora, Jonah, Thomas, no Althea, not even Sister Lillian, just Gregory. It was as if the others had been constructed around him, as if their memories were part of a ritual, not a reality. That night, Althea's apartment. Althea sat at her desk. She pulled out the journal she had taken from the orphanage. Gregory's final entries had been scrawled in a different hand, shaky, desperate, almost as if he was trying to remember his own name before it slipped away. One line had been repeated 6 times on the last page. The mirror is memory. The mirror is mouth. Do not speak your name to it. And then finally, they hear the last name left to speak. She rose to check her reflection. Her mirror was fogged, but she hadn't bathed. No kettle had boiled. She wiped it, but the reflection that looked back wasn't hers. It was Gregory. His stitched mouth was finally open, and he whispered, "You remember me, so now I stay." Final report, confidential, filed July 1923. The Greystone Orphanage site was razed completely. No human remains were found beneath the chapel ruins. No trace of the original staff. A final sealed envelope, found under the floorboards, contained a single note. They were not children, they were echoes, and we named them until they became real. 1 year later, a new orphanage opened in rural Devonshire. It was built on an old estate with no official record of prior occupants. On the gate, carved into fresh wood, were 27 names. No explanation. The last one, Althea read 'em, accepted.